Welcome to Echo of Crime YouTube channel. When Donald J. Trump entered the White House in January 2017, he did something unusual in modern American politics. He arrived not from the military or from decades in public service, but from the world of private business. For years, Trump's identity had been tied to real estate deals, high-profile branding ventures, hotels, golf courses, and media appearances. His name itself was a business asset, a logo, a trademark, a brand. But when he became president, that world did not simply disappear. Instead, the presidency and business became intertwined in a way that had rarely been seen before in U.S. history. Unlike previous presidents, Donald Trump did not divest from his business interests when he took office. Instead, his assets were placed into a revocable trust, controlled by his children and longtime executives, meaning that, while he was president, his businesses continued to operate, generate revenue, sign deals, and expand. According to research from the government ethics watchdog Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, Trump accumulated thousands of documented conflicts of interest during his time in office, events or meetings in which government decision-making intersected with business presence or benefit. This was not illegal, but it was unprecedented, and it raised questions about whether public policy could overlap with private interest. Hotels bearing his name became gathering points. Political organizations held events in his properties. Foreign dignitaries booked stays in Trump hotels in Washington and New York. Critics argued that this created the appearance, if not the reality, of pay-to-access influence. Supporters argued these were ordinary business operations and that Trump had every right to maintain ownership of what he built. Years later, after Trump had left office, these questions evolved into something larger. In 2022 and 2023, the state of New York brought forward a civil lawsuit alleging that Trump and the Trump Organization had inflated the value of their properties by billions of dollars in order to secure more favorable loan terms and tax benefits. This case did not accuse Trump of stealing money from the public, nor did it allege espionage or foreign influence. Instead, it focused on financial documents, spreadsheets, valuations, and statements provided to banks and insurers. State prosecutors argued that some assets, such as a luxury apartment and golf courses, were listed at values far higher than their appraised worth. Trump's attorneys argued the opposite, that real estate valuations are subjective, market-driven, and that banks involved in the loans were sophisticated institutions capable of their own assessments. The case became a public courtroom moment, not because of the numbers, but because of what those numbers symbolized. Where does personal business stop when someone holds public power? And what happens when those two worlds never fully separate? Beyond the legal disputes, there was a cultural one. Trump's presidency blurred the line between political leadership and personal branding. Supporters viewed him as a businessman bringing entrepreneurial problem-solving into government. Critics saw the blending of public office and private interest as a risk to ethics and public trust. Meanwhile, Trump's supporters argued that investigations targeting him reflected political motivation, not misconduct. Critics argued that accountability matters most when power is greatest. This debate did not end when Trump left office. It continues in courtrooms, in Congress, in media, and online, where perceptions of power, influence, and accountability often depend as much on belief as on fact. The camera pans past a hotel lobby chandelier, gold light reflecting on polished marble floors. A booklet sits on a desk, Trump Organization Annual Report. Before the presidency, there was the brand. During the presidency, the brand remained. And long after the presidency, the questions surrounding it continue. In politics, power is not just what you hold, it's what it is connected to. From the moment Donald Trump entered national politics, one of the most defining features of his presidency was his communication style. Unlike previous presidents, who spoke primarily through formal speeches and press briefings, Trump used direct public messaging, especially Twitter, as his primary outlet. Millions followed his posts in real time. Supporters saw this as refreshing, a direct line from the president to the public, without media filtering. Critics argued it bypassed traditional accountability and led to confusion, polarization, and misinformation. The result was a presidency shaped not only by policy decisions, but by language, tone, and the framing of truth itself. Traditional White House communication involves layers of review, briefing documents, and coordinated messaging. Trump changed that. His statements were often spontaneous, sometimes drafted in seconds, then broadcast to the world instantly. Fact-checking organizations, such as the Washington Post fact-checker and PolitiFact, tracked these statements, publishing databases of remarks they determined to be false or misleading. Supporters countered that political statements are always subject to interpretation, and that critics focused on semantics while ignoring broader context and intent. Meanwhile, the sheer frequency of Trump's communication set a new pace for the presidency. He dominated the conversation, every news cycle pivoting around his words. Critics argued this overwhelmed the public's ability to separate statements intended to persuade from statements intended to inform. Supporters saw it as transparency, a leader unfiltered and uncensored. Trump's relationship with the press became one of the most contentious aspects of his presidency. He frequently referred to mainstream outlets as fake news, while praising outlets that aligned with him. Journalists argued that this eroded trust in media institutions and made shared facts harder to establish in public discourse. At the same time, media organizations benefited from the traffic and viewership his presidency generated. Television ratings surged. News articles multiplied. Political commentary became everyday conversation. Trump did not simply appear in the news. He became the news. This dynamic deepened the divide. People increasingly turned to different news sources based on which truth they felt aligned with their identity. In the final months of his presidency, Trump repeatedly challenged the legitimacy of the 2020 election. Dozens of courts rejected legal challenges due to insufficient evidence. Election officials from both parties confirmed the results. However, Trump continued to assert that the election was stolen. Supporters believed him. Critics warned that this rhetoric undermined public faith in democratic institutions. The tension reached a breaking point on January 6, 2021, when some of his supporters stormed the Capitol. Trump was later impeached over accusations that his words contributed to encouraging unrest, though he was acquitted in the Senate. The event intensified the debate about leadership responsibility versus individual accountability in a polarized nation. This chapter of Trump's presidency was not just about statements. It was about trust. Who decides what is true? How do citizens verify information in a world of instant communication? What happens when a nation no longer shares a common narrative of reality? Supporters of Trump argue that he challenged media bias, political elitism, and institutional gatekeeping. Critics argue he weakened the shared truth needed for national unity. The debate is ongoing and remains deeply rooted in identity, belief, and the power of narrative. A dimly lit room with multiple television screens tuned to different news networks, each showing a different version of the same story. In every presidency, policies shape history, but in this one, words shaped reality, and the struggle for truth became part of the struggle for power. While communication and personal business interests shaped much of the public debate, the core of any presidency lies in the policies that change how people live. Donald Trump's presidency brought sharp shifts in immigration, civil rights regulations, environmental rules, and the balance between state and federal power. These were not abstract. They affected workplaces, communities, and daily experiences across the country. Supporters viewed these shifts as restoring traditional governance and protecting national identity. Critics saw them as weakening civil liberties and rolling back established protections. Immigration policy was one of the most defining arenas. Early in his presidency, Trump signed an executive order restricting entry from several predominantly Muslim-majority countries. Supporters argued it was a national security measure. Critics, including civil rights groups and international observers, labeled it discriminatory. Later, changes to asylum rules, refugee admissions, and border processing policies reshaped how the United States handled migrants and people fleeing conflict. the administration expanded immigration enforcement, resulting in an increase in detentions and family separations, which became a focal point of national and international controversy. To supporters, these actions signaled control, sovereignty, and border integrity. To opponents, they represented a moral and humanitarian regression. Beyond immigration, the administration pursued policy reversals affecting education protections, labor rights, and healthcare access. For example, advocacy organizations noted reversals of federal guidelines that protected transgender students in public schools, and reductions in enforcement of certain civil rights cases in housing and employment. Environmental regulations were also rolled back, including limits on power plant emissions and protections for streams and wetlands. Supporters argued these regulations placed unnecessary burdens on businesses and energy producers, while critics feared long-term ecological harm and weakening of public health protections. These policy reversals were not hidden. They were debated, defended, challenged, and in many cases taken to court. Some were upheld, some were blocked, some continue to be disputed today. Reactions to these policies form two sharply different narratives in the public mind. To supporters, Trump represented strength, decisive leadership, and a willingness to challenge systems they believed were unresponsive, overreaching, or elitist. They viewed the rollback of regulations and hardline stances on immigration as correcting excess, protecting American jobs, and asserting national identity. To critics, the same decisions represented harm to vulnerable communities, the weakening of equal protections, and the erosion of rights built over decades. Organizations such as the ACLU and NAACP repeatedly issued public statements and initiated legal challenges in response to these policies. The divide was not just ideological, it was emotional. People experienced these policies in their workplaces, families, communities, and sense of belonging. When Trump left office in January 2021, the debates did not end. Court cases continued. Policy reversals were reviewed. Public opinion remained sharply divided. For millions, Trump's presidency symbolizes disruption, either positive or negative. For others, it represents a shift in how power, identity, and truth operate in the digital age. And for the country, the legacy is still unfolding in legislation, in elections, in community discussions, and in the cultural divides that remain. A slow pan across the National Mall at dusk. The U.S. Capitol in silhouette. People walking. Voices in the distance. No music, just atmosphere. But the effects of power reach long after the office is vacated. For some, this era brought renewal. For others, uncertainty. History will continue to interpret, debate, and re-examine. Because power is not just what is done, it is what it leaves behind.